cases of missing children in South Africa are significantly on the rise, with many cases that don't receive the media attention simply going by unnoticed, leaving parents as well as loved ones at a loss and unending grief in the knowledge that their children cannot be located. So what are we missing as a country? Where are we failing our children and not giving them the protection against the social ills? Well, for this discussion, we have Mr. Anzio Jacobs, who's the Acting Child Safety and Protection Manager of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. Anzio, thank you so much for joining us. Look, we're still celebrating Human Rights Month in this country, right? Yet seemingly our children's rights are not given the necessary attention. Children are being killed, raped, trafficked and kidnapped daily in alarming numbers. Where exactly are we failing our children as a country? Anzio, please unmute.
Sorry, good evening and apologies for that. I was saying that unfortunately as a country, we're failing at many levels. I think that the first one is that our social fabric is slowly unraveling. I think that in many instances where communities would have ordinarily played such a strong role and families played such a strong role, that social fabric is slowly being unraveled. And that's the reason that our children are in crisis in the country. We find that in areas where children live, learn and play, violence is most rife, and we see that in the statistics that we see from SABC. And generally, in cases like with Jocelyn Smith and others that don't go named when they don't make it to the media.
Let's talk about that. I mean, Anzio, in cases, like you said, of those missing children like Jocelyn Smith and many others who couldn't grab media attention, how should we as communities, the government and social services then take part in ensuring that we look after our children?
Well, I think that a very important part of this is that we need to know what the mechanisms are. And so there are things like community policing forums, which people can get involved in at a community level, and we do encourage this. Those community policing forums are in fact linked to SABC, and so ensure that responses are faster. We know that in areas such as Delft, where such high crime exists and there's such high rates of violence, the community policing forums are working really hard and working together with SABC to engage with communities. And we see that this model would be useful elsewhere as well. Once communities know that there are community policing forums, they can actively be involved. Once they get involved in those forums, they can directly relate their information to SABC. That makes the speed at which cases are dealt with faster, and that means that we then in effect use the mechanisms that are in place, even though they don't work perfectly at the moment.
Look, Anzio, I mean, maybe talk to us about some of the initiatives that, the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, for example, currently has to deal with all these challenges.
So at the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, we've got a child protection, safety and protection unit. And the safety and protection unit, amongst the others, does the work of looking at violence against children. And in so doing, we engage with implementing partners across the country. So we work in all of the provinces through implementing partners who in many instances are looking at best practices for child safety and protection. Those best practices look at trying to set in place preventative measures in many instances to educate children on their rights and how to protect their well-being, and also to give them information on how to access services that are freely available to them. We, of course, then as part of our work also engage with government and critical stakeholders in hopes that we can make policy changes that will make environments safer where children live, learn and play. And this is part of the broader work that we're doing, not only in 8 provinces, but going into district level. The hardest to reach areas are the ones that we try and get to first, because those children are often the ones that we don't see. The children that are in rural areas, the children that are in farming areas, the children that are out of the sight of the cities and the apparatus of the state.
And speaking of those policies, Anzio, I mean, which brings me next to my next question, right? Starting from a national policy level, drafting of bills that will seek to address these various challenges that are faced by the most vulnerable members of our society, who in turn are supposed to be the future of our children. How do we empower these children?
Well, I think it's really important that we begin to tell children what their rights are. But more than that, to empower them, we need them to understand how they are to exercise their rights within the framework of the South African law. We know that we need to tell children from a young age that they have the right to bodily autonomy, that they have the right to safety and protection. And when they don't experience those rights, we need to tell them where it is that they can go to access them.
All right. And in closing, Anzio, let's talk about the challenges that these children face in this country, bearing in mind, of course, I think you touched on it earlier, the different socioeconomic challenges like your poverty, neglect, no parental or guardian figures, lack of access to quality education, or even education itself. There's many. How do we even begin addressing these, you think?
There are indeed many challenges, and I think what we can do to address them is, one, to reach out to community-based organizations that are around us. These community-based organizations are often the first response line in communities where, for example, someone can't get to the police for fear of what the police may respond like. There are also NGOs that are in every country, in every part of the country, and so in each province there are NGOs that service these needs. But there are organizations that we work with, such as Childline, where children can pick up the phone, or even adults can pick up the phone and seek advice when they urgently need it. We ensure that people have access to healthcare, which is also a protection issue, and that is by way of ensuring that people have medical records and carry passbooks with them with medical information in it, such that they can access the clinics and the like. We also need to work closely with police. The South African police services are carefully working within various communities. And once we link up with police and try and strengthen their efforts, we're able to make meaningful interventions at a community level. These are, of course, not all the ways which we can get involved, but once we start to teach children that these mechanisms exist, they themselves can defend their own rights and well-being.
Thank you so much for that, Anzio. Unfortunately, we're out of time, because I also wanted to delve into the issues of whether or not police are actually well equipped, to deal with issues of, missing children when it is actually reported at the police station. But thank you so much for your contribution. That is Mr. Anzio Jacobs, the acting child safety as well as protection program manager at the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund.